Again. My last mission in Syria was the battle for the hospital, which became the stronghold of the Islamic State in the city. In fact, there were two strongholds, really. One being the central one, which was the hospital, and a slightly lesser one around the football stadium, which was about sort of 500 meters away. It wasn't too far away from the hospital. The big mission that I took part in was actually to cut the link between the hospital and the stadium, which caused a huge amount of problems for our unit because we pushed out to cut this link. And what it really did was it exposed us to a ferocious amount of enemy fire, because the Islamic State were just absolutely not intent on giving up the street that connected these two places without a fight. And I actually wrote a book when I came back to the UK, which details this incident where we pushed out into the street. We were met by people that we thought were civilians, but there is talk that they could have been affiliated to ISIS or ISIS supporters. And two of our guys, including our commander, were led onto a road, and myself as well. I was the third person to enter that road, when we were then ambushed by an Islamic State position or patrol coming up the road, and they shot from left to right, killing the first person, the second person, and then when they got to me, I was already turning away to rush off the road, and I was struck by a ricochet from a bullet that had been fired that must have bounced off the road, and I fell to the ground. Lost my glasses because I was wearing them that night. I usually wear contact lenses. I crawled off the road, turned to engage the Islamic State fighters that were shooting at us, and then I rushed off the road. It happened so fast that I didn't see the two guys shot next to me, and I didn't even notice that I'd been hit myself. My mind just went into a blur. I could see flashes and I could hear the snap of the bullets as they cracked around my head. And then what followed was 24 hours of hell as we came to terms with the fact that we'd lost these two really important people, two really important and amazing people. But then came under this sustained attack with no food, no water for 24 hours. And it was only the intervention of the Americans as they bombed the area and destroyed all the Islamic State positions that actually saved us.
No مشكلة.
That was a crucial mission because for the first time, those two power centers of ISIS were completely isolated. And we began to engage and fight at the hospital. And we lost guys because there were so many places for the Islamic State to hide. This building was thick concrete. It was very difficult to get into because it had been so well reinforced. It was just like a vast pillbox right in the center of Raqqa. And there was this one moment to begin with. I would shoot at the building with a PKM, with a sniper rifle, aiming for their snipers, going for the windows, trying to hit their sentries. I'd fire RPGs at through their windows. And then one day we got on the radio started blaring after the third day, and they said, "Stop firing at the hospital. They're holding babies out of the hospital windows." And we turned and we looked at the hospital, and there was an Islamic State fighter holding a baby out of the window. And the message was clear, that we've got children and civilians in here, stop shooting at us, essentially. And then after a few minutes, he then pulled the baby inside, and there was no more fighting. A few sniper shots. We did lose a couple of guys from snipers in the 2 weeks that followed, or the week and a half that followed. But then the Islamic State one day surrendered, and we were asked not to shoot at them when they eventually left the city, which was a moment of relief, because for the first time I realized the battle for Raqqa was over, and also a moment of satisfaction because I saw the Islamic State fighters limping to these buses that had been provided for them, and they got on and drove into the desert where they would eventually be hunted down and killed anyway. And but also a moment of reflection, because for 3 years I've been fighting ISIS and given up my life. And it was, as far as I was concerned, completely over for me. Now, after 7 years, there is another transformative event. And that transformative event is very similar to that one that I experienced way back in 2017 with the end of ISIS. And that is the end of the Assad regime. So the FSA, led by HTS, has gone on this huge counterattack in the last few months. It's defeated Assad. Assad has fled the country and they've taken Damascus. And the West, because they've seen 14 years of dreadful civil war in Syria, they're very hopeful that HTS will practice what it's preaching at the moment, that they're genuinely talking that they're reforming, that they want to see a Syria that's for all Syrians, and that it's not going to be an extremist hellhole that we've all feared that it might turn out to be. But the trouble is, we don't know exactly what's going on in Jelani, who's the head of HTS, what's going on inside his head. And only time will tell, I suppose. But that leads me on to, I suppose, what I've always argued for, and that is that the answer to this crisis has been in Syria the whole time, and that is local people. We should never consider top-down peace building. And what I mean by top-down peace building is basically imparting so-called democracy on people, destroying what they've built and imposing our version of institutions and states, etc., on local people. You have to have local buy-in. You have to have people genuinely engaged in a state building and in a peacemaking process. So I really hope that this event means that Britain, America, etc., goes back to the table with the Kurds, with Jelani in Damascus, with the Turk-backed rebels in the north as well, and the other various groups that exist in Syria, and they put together a peace plan for Syria that reflects everybody. It doesn't have to be perfect, but some form of federated, democratic to some degree Syria that promotes peace and solidarity and community relations between its various peoples will be something that we can genuinely hope that might actually help Syria in the long run. So my fear for Syria is that, one, the civil war will continue, that Jelani in Damascus, the Turkish rebels in the north, the Kurds that lead the SDF, etc., will all start fighting amongst themselves to try and create one winner at the end of all of this. That would be dreadful for the country. After 14 years of war, of hundreds of thousands of innocent people dead, after millions of people seeing their lives ripped apart, that's the very last thing that we want to see. Yet at the same time, it also risks the emergence of this terror organization that has blighted Syria and the world for so long, and that is the Islamic State. The Islamic State was militarily defeated in Raqqa and Mosul by the Kurds that led the SDF and by the Americans and Brits, and also by the coalition and their partners in Iraq. And they defeated the huge army that ISIS had created and the functioning states that they'd created as well. But they didn't destroy the ideology. The ideology of hate and of evil still exists in Syria and Iraq. It just fled to the desert, weaker, but more aggressive and just as ambitious as ever was. And they are waiting for this crisis to get worse. Because where there is a crisis, you will find all the isms that we despise and that cause so much misery in this world. Everything from sort of fascism to extreme communism to Islamism, etc., or terrorism. All those things thrive on when communities are divided and when people are divided. And in Syria, because we failed to build a future for Syria that people can believe in, where you've got local buy-in, because we didn't invest in the economy and give people jobs and hope for a future in that direction, again, it leaves open the door for those evil isms that exploit those differences. And if this war were to drag on and the Islamic State were to rise up, there's a real threat that not only will we see a spike in migration of refugees coming to Europe, but we'll also see a huge burst and a huge increase in terrorism-related incidents around the world, because the Islamic State has made it quite clear that they will continue to fight, they will continue to kill until they achieve their long-term aims, which, as far as I can see, since they are a death cult, is the complete destruction of all diversity in the world and all culture and all learning and all everything good that we consider all that we consider good in the West, basically. The Islamic State is becoming more aggressive because aggression is bred by desperation, essentially, and also aspiration that they will rebuild their caliphate and, in fact, grow it to a much greater extent than they ever did. In Syria, and Iraq as well, they did so much to divide the different communities. In fact, a lot of people were bemused that the Islamic State was deliberately targeting children in schools. They were deliberately targeting monasteries and places of worship and committing the most atrocious crimes in that direction, because people wondered, why were they doing this? Because all it does is turn people against them. Well, in reality, what they were doing actually makes a lot of sense, because they were actually just trying to promote hate between the communities. The stakes here are enormous. There are 100,000 ISIS prisoners still in captivity, and without a certain future for them as well, they also are a huge risk to us all, because if they're released, many of them, tens of thousands, could come to Britain. So it's a horrifying future if we don't get this right. So there are many ways these Islamic State prisoners could be released. And as I said, there are more than 80 to 100,000 of them, including people like Shamima Begum, etc. Now, the Islamic State could release them if there is increased turmoil and violence in the country, and the SDF is no longer able to truly protect the camps, which are a huge burden on them. The Islamic State could free them and give them arms, and that would be terrible. But also, Jilani and the FSA that back him, and the HDS, they have released all the ISIS prisoners that they've ever captured. So if Jilani takes control of the camps, if this new government in Damascus performs in the future as they have done in the past, then there's a real risk that they'll just simply let them go. And they'll talk about saying that there's no evidence, that they can't try them, and that they've already done their time and all the rest. They'll come up with excuses for the West. But either way, time and time again, that includes British ISIS fighters as well that have come into their custody, the FSA and the HTS have done the same thing over and over again, and that is release them and allow them to go missing. Now, if that happens to these camps, that's 70,000 battle-hardened ISIS fighters potentially being released by either the new government or some violent faction in the future. So making sure that we support local people that are holding these people, make sure they have the resources to hold them, and then potentially even put them on trial, spares us this huge risk that these people could be released and could come to Europe.